Ladies and gentlemen, this is the time we move on to the panel discussion of the day. The discussion topic is agriculture was the silver lining during COVID times, and how do we convert it to the golden opportunity? May I invite the moderator for this session, Mr. Sivakumar, on the stage, along with the panelists, Mr. Ram Kondinya, Dr. P. Chandra, Dr. Kalpana Sastry, and Dr. Joanna Kane Pataka.
So very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to be back in the midst of people for conferencing. We have had one too many online events over the last 18 months. It's great that all of you could make it this morning to be part of this wonderful event. Something that stood out extremely positively during COVID times, as you all know, is the growth of agriculture in India. And that's why we called it the silver lining. Just 2 days ago, we had the first quarter gross value added numbers. And agriculture is the only sector that was showing growth over the pre-COVID times. Every other sector, of course, grew. But over the dip that we had seen last year. And even last year, when the whole economy shrank about 7%, we had agricultural growth of over 3%. I think that has been possible because of many reasons. Of course, right from the word go, agriculture was exempted from all the lockdowns. Government had stepped up the procurement of cereals and oil seeds and pulses very substantially over that period. Many state governments had reformed the agricultural marketing laws so that the buying facilities could be opened up beyond mandis, which are obviously crowded places, and capacities reduced during the COVID times, and so on. And lots of innovative business models were brought in by the private sector. The digital technologies in particular, we had a never before kind of growth in the digital agri-tech startups with increasing investments happening into this space. And of course, the rain gods favored, and we had reasonably good monsoon last year, and we seem to be having a decent monsoon this year also. In a large country, obviously, there are always some pockets where you have deficiency and some pockets where you'll have some intensive rains, but notwithstanding, on balance, we had decent rain. So all of this delivered a superior growth compared to every other sector. We, of course, had challenges that soon after the lockdowns, the out-of-home consumption stopped for many products. So as a result, and also because of dislocation in supply chains and logistics, we had serious problems in movement of perishable products. With out-of-home consumption dropping, milk prices dropped. fruits and vegetable prices dropped, and those farmers who were relying only on that had to suffer for an extensive period. And so things of that kind that we had seen, but notwithstanding that, I think on balance, we had an excellent growth. I think idea of the conversation that we would have today amongst us is, now with this silver lining that we have seen during the COVID period, how do we really navigate ourselves towards a golden future, realizing this kind of an opportunity? I mean, what do we see in that kind of a golden future? One for sure, while agriculture has grown, the farmer incomes haven't grown to that extent. In fact, the per capita incomes of farmers is just about 1/5 of an average of every other profession in the country. So that's abysmally low. We have, for example, accomplished food security at an aggregate level, but we still have challenges in terms of the hidden hunger or nutrition, the nutrition security challenge that we still have to deal with. Of course, in India and around the world as well, especially among the poorer people, but nutrition has a different kind of challenge even among the richer segments. Then, of course, we are otherwise blessed with lots of natural resources, very varied agroclimatic conditions, water resources, but the way we have been consuming the natural resources in the country, whether it's water or topsoil, which are absolutely critical for agriculture, is like there is no tomorrow. In fact, if you look at the Earth Overshoot Index, as we are on September 2nd, already for over a month, we have exhausted all the resources that we would renew till December 31st this year. That means we are in debt already to our children and grandchildren in the way we are growing all our agricultural crops and, of course, some other sectors as well. Now, on top of that, we also have the challenge of climate change. Extreme weather episodes are more frequent, unseasonal rains, very dry monsoon periods, and dry winters and whatnot. I mean, we have also seen the impact of this, and the impact that is forecasted is even more adverse. So therefore, in terms of what we are looking, when we say golden future, is not just an economic number of a GDP growth, but what does it do to farmers' income, what does it do to consumer nutrition, what does it do to the natural resources and deal with climate change, and agriculture also has an opportunity to contribute to solving climate change issues. Now, these are all the kinds of issues that we need to factor when we talk about a golden future. So I think that is what we will see, what does it really take. Raj, as part of his welcome remarks, has already introduced the panelists, and we couldn't have got a better diversity among the panel in terms of the thoughts that can be brought to a subject like this. So may I start with Ram Kaundinya, and with all his experience, tell us, if you have to make use of this silver lining and navigate towards a golden future, what is it that we need to do?
Thank you. Yeah, I think you have summarized the situation very well. I would like to list about 3 areas where I think as an industry or as other stakeholders we can focus upon. Number 1 is that we have to move our agriculture to a demand-driven agriculture from the current production-driven agriculture. We have been producing because of the shortage times, but we still continue to do that, and we overproduce certain crops like rice and wheat, and we underproduce certain crops which are more nutritious or more required by the consumers. So we have to move towards consumer-driven, market-driven, demand-driven agriculture, where the consumer food basket is undergoing a huge change. There is export-oriented agriculture that is required because government also has set up a huge target towards exports. Then we need more of nutrition, which also needs is required with the consumers. So you need contract farming type of systems. and you need identity-preserved supply chain systems. So these are all the things which will go into demand-driven agriculture. That's point number one. Point number two, I would like to say is that we have to still increase yields. You know, some theorists or some armchair idealists say that there is no need to increase yields because we are self-sufficient. I think that's a very bogus claim. Basically, we still have to increase yields because to feed about 150 crore population in the next 10 years' time and 170 crores in the next 20 years' time, we have to increase yields. We have to produce more, but I would like to divert the attention towards producing more not only per acre, but also per liter of water and per unit of each natural resource that we consume. I think that is a very important area we have to track. Currently, we are not tracking that. If a kilo of rice consumes 5,000 liters of water to come to our table, I don't think many consumers are aware of it. We don't load environmental costs on products. That is one of the areas which we have to look at, that how do we conserve natural resources while increasing yields, and also how do we develop climate resilient plant varieties. I think these are all areas which need attention. That is the second item. Our yields, again, under this, I would like to say that our yields are still low compared to global averages, and we have to increase yields to the global average levels. Only in wheat, we are somewhere closer to the global average, but in all other crops, we are much below. And we are still importing almost 1 lakh crores worth of oils, edible oils, and pulses and things like that. So we need to bridge that gap. Climate change is expected to reduce yields in the next 30 years by almost 20 to 25% yield reductions will happen because of climate change. So you mentioned about that. So I think that is also an area where we need to develop varieties. Finally, I would like to say that we must use modern technology in this fight. Modern technology could be related to biotechnology. It could be related to the new gene editing technology because they will help us in generating some of the nutritious and disease-tolerant crops. But we should also not forget to use, and all this must happen with reduced chemical usage. That is also something the technologies can help us to do. We have to improve nutrition of the output, and we have to reduce labor costs because currently labor costs are really killing the farmer. Almost 50% of the cost is on labor. So that also we have to see how to reduce. I think there is a need to look at our crop portfolio. We have to bring about changes in the crop portfolios to suit the new demands. And we have to pay a lot of attention to agronomic practices. I think there is a lot that can be still achieved through agronomic practices, improved agronomic practices, like, for example, conservation tillage or direct seeded rice and various other things which can help. Apart from growing, when I said crop portfolio, I'm sure John will talk more about that. How do we bring smart grains into our diet and then things like that. I think there is a lot of agenda in front of us, which we have to really pursue. In this decade, we have to bring about a huge change in the way we look at how do we do agriculture and modernization of agriculture. Maybe in some areas also we'll look at going back to some of the traditional varieties and some of the traditional plants, which will also help us in fighting these challenges that we're facing.
Thank you. I think when I started, I thought it's really complex, but I think you brought out the three crucial elements in terms of the most significant shift is how do you make it demand responsive? And second is the role of technology, which is both from productivity perspective as well as from all the other challenges that we have on resource and climate change and so on. And finally, on the choice of crops. Let me use that as a segue and move on to Joanna, like you're mentioning. And see, looking at these crops, since your area of expertise is on smart food, and we all want to be clear on what actually do we mean by smart food and how the choice of crops can really help in navigating ourselves into this golden future. Joanna.
Okay, thanks, Shiv. So this is actually about, it's almost like combining a lot of what you just said, Ram, but pulling it together to create a triple bottom line that it's especially designed for food and agriculture. So good companies today do have a triple bottom line, and they have sustainability reports, etc. But how can you design that especially for agriculture and food? And that's what the smart food is about. It's about a smart food triple bottom line. So every solution in food and agriculture, looking at how it's good for you, so the nutrition and health, good for the planet, that environmental sustainability, and good for the farmer. So how do you ensure all those three are in every solution? And if you look at how the focus has changed over the decades, so in the 50s and 60s, where India was very much focused on just having enough food to eat, and that's where the Green Revolution started. It was after that that there became a consciousness of not just food security, but nutrition security. And so that got added to the bundle. And then more recently, the UN and other organizations started talking about sustainable diets. So then diets that are sustainable on the environment. But what we did with Smart Food is we said we have to bring all that together and go a step further. So every solution is good for you, good for the planet, and good for the farmer, and how that's integrated. And it's about having that holistic approach. If you focus only on one, you could be damaging the other part. So how can you ensure that across all the solutions? And some of the components, which are, some of them are newer, but how do we take that forward? So one way would be, how do you have policies that have a more level playing field for those more nutritious and smarter foods? So like the millets, I always have to mention millets. How do you ensure there's a level playing field, or better still, they're incentivized? How can you incentivize farmers and industry so that they support those foods that are smarter foods? Another component is looking at varieties of new varieties of crops, not only by yield, drought tolerance, pest and disease resilience, but also by nutrition. How can you integrate that in? Now, it's very difficult because you can't see the nutrition in the seed, you can't see the nutrition in the end crop, and the farmer doesn't see a difference in the yield, but it adds a significant extra value to that triple bottom line. And we know, if I use an example of pearl millet, we know we can triple the iron and zinc level just by which variety we choose. So how can we build industry that can recognize and give credit to also building nutrition into those varieties? Another area that's very important to build more in the future is biofortification. So that's natural fortification. So again, breeding improved varieties, not only looking at yield and all the other criteria that's needed, but also at the nutrition level. And studies have shown it's not always a trade-off. You can increase yield and nutrition level in many of the crops. Another area to think of is, how do you combine both natural farming and natural foods? What's the use of natural farming if we adulterate our foods? What's the use of trying to have natural foods if the ingredients to start with haven't been naturally produced? So how can you build that more? Also, nutrition-sensitive agriculture is needed. So how can we, when we're looking at all the different good agricultural practices, how do we integrate nutrition into that? We know the better soil is going to create better nutrients in the end crops. We know the diversity on farm is extremely critical eventually for more nutritious diets. So thinking of the whole agricultural practice, thinking of integrating nutrition in that. Also, whole grain is another part of this. We can grow amazing crops. So wheat, for example, is super nutritious. The fiber, the iron, the zinc, but what's the use if we turn it into a maida? So how do we ensure we look at that whole value chain approach to keep the goodness of what you start with in the agricultural end, that it's still there when the consumer gets it? So the ultra processing that goes on, the additives, etc. How can we see through this? And there's a huge trend now, as you know, to plant-based meats and other plant-based foods. But a lot of them, if you look at the processing, it's ultra processed. So we're not ending up with something which necessarily is what you would have as real food. So how do we think through the whole process here? The last point I want to make is probably something very, very close to my heart, is if we're going to have a smart food triple bottom line and more smart foods in agriculture and food, we have to bring millets back into mainstream. Millets are one of those truly amazing super smart foods. The nutrition levels are unbelievable. They're so unique because they're the low glycemic index, and diabetes is hugely increasing and very dangerous. We've brought out a recent study that's shown that millets can reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease. It can reduce cholesterol and pressure. So cardiovascular disease is the #1 killer in the world. Plus, they're very high in iron and zinc, which are the 2 of the 3 biggest micronutrient deficiencies worldwide. And anemia, iron-based anemia, is growing in India. So these are not only super nutritious, but they target some of our biggest needs. They're also environmentally friendly. They have a low carbon footprint. They survive with minimal water, survive in higher temperatures. They're climate smart. And that resilience they bring for the farmer is very positive. But it'll only be good for the farmer if we really grow the market and the demand for that. Being demand-led, as you were saying, it's also about how do we drive demand? How do we drive the future so that it's going to be a smart future? Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Joanna. I think I'm taking away 2 things from there. I think one is not look at things in isolation, but somewhat in an integrated fashion, whether it's people, profit, or planet, and triple bottom line you mentioned. I think much of our problem has been because we have been looking at one in isolation. A lot of our water-guzzling crops are probably because of that. And the second point is the importance of crops that we probably ignored for several decades. I mean, millets, for example, has been the central stay for India centuries ago, but I think we need to bring back some crops of that kind, and that's one way to become smarter and move towards. Thank you for those key inputs. Let me now turn to my right with all those somewhat radical left thoughts. Dr. Chandrasekhara now is an expert on agricultural extension. All these thoughts, if you have to really make them come out on the in the real world, the farmers will have to really adopt many of these things. So what does it really take to convince farmers, align, and make it worth their while to participate in this journey? And how do we go about that?
Yeah, thank you, Shivkumar ji. Farmers are changing, agriculture is changing, agricultural extension must change. Therefore, we need to strengthen agricultural extension. It is not one-time activity. I think we have to keep an eye on this all the time to come. I would like to draw your attention on 4 important areas. Number 1, we need to focus on group-led extension. If you look at extension worker to farmer ratio in our country, it works out to be 1,132 farmers for every extension worker. Practically, it is impossible for any extension worker to sort out all the problem of all the farmers all the time. Therefore, we need to look at group-led extension. The same extension worker, if he mobilize farmers into commodity-centric clusters, probably he need to work with 2 to 3 groups. So he can devote quality time on transfer of technology part. This we have to take into consideration. In fact, Government of India has initiated promoting 10,000 farmers producers companies. This is a very big development. I think public or private, we need to join hands together to promote farmers producers organization. In Manage on 1st January, we launched Manage FPO Academy. It's a PPP platform where many knowledge partners, they work with Manage for building capacity of different functionaries in farmers producers organization. The second important point is market-led extension. Focus on market-led extension in agricultural extension. So we need to sensitize every farmer on harvest and post-harvest activities, because that is where more profit lies. It's very important for us to involve farmers in those activities so that he can make more profit with the same piece of land and other natural resources. So for that purpose, we need to sensitize all the extension workers in very critical activities. This skill gap exists very much. Very important activities like sorting, grading, packing, bagging, and storage. These activities, logistics. So these are very important to sensitize the extension workers on one side and the farmers on other side. When we talk about market-led extension, exploring local markets, local consumption centers, and linking them to local production center is very, very important. We can prevent wastage, we can prevent overhead cost. I just take one or two examples. We are running large number of government-aided SC, ST, OBC, minority hostels across the country. Thousands of students are taking food. Is it possible to link our farmers producers organizations to these consumption centers locally? Second one, in midday meals, 12,000 students are taking food every day. Is it possible to link our local production with the schools where the midday meal program is implemented? You know, in India, every year, we perform around 5 million marriages. We find the function halls everywhere. Is it possible to link our farmers producers organization with these function halls? So there are 904 universities are there. In every university, we accommodate thousands of students. They take food throughout the year. So is it possible to link our farmers producers organizations with this agriculture university hostels? This is, making local as vocal and linking to local consumption units. The third important point I would like to highlight is promoting PPP-led extension, public-private partnership-led extension. We have large number of FPOs on one side, cooperatives, agribusiness companies, and NGOs, media groups, private banks. They work for development. They play very important role in agriculture development. I don't think we can achieve agriculture development keeping them in isolation. It's very important for public extension to work very closely with all these private extension service providers. The last point is agripreneurship-led extension. We are drawing, the attention, interest of thousands and thousands of unemployed agriculture graduates. We produce around 80,000 agriculture graduates out of 74 agriculture universities every year. Out of that, only 20% get jobs in public or private sector. Other, 80%, either they pursue higher education or wait for some good opportunity. So in one of the scheme, Agri-Clinic and Agribusiness Center scheme, we have trained around 75,000 unemployed agriculture graduates. 32,000 have established different agri-ventures in different parts of the country. They live in villages. They are qualified people. They provide value-added extension services to farmers. It's very important to promote, strengthen these agripreneurs so that they lead the change. They are the ambassadors of change. Another important segment I would like to highlight in agripreneurship-led extension. We have 2.82 lakhs, around 3 lakh input dealers in nook and corner of the country. They sell seeds, fertilizer, pesticides. They maintain very close social and economic contact with every farmer. So thanks to Agriculture Infrastructure Fund, where these people can make use of this fund and create local agri infrastructure so that farmers and themselves, they can take, good benefit. So these are all some of the important areas which I think agricultural extension should absorb, internalize and implement so that ultimately farmers and agriculture will win and we're all comfortable. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Chandrasekhar. I think what started as an idea of demand responsive production system, we heard some specific thoughts on how do we localize and ground them. And on extension front, I think very interestingly, you said, let's broaden the scope of extension, not just as agriculture science being brought to the farmers, but end to end. And at the same time, very importantly, look at the specific context and then apply appropriate methodology, whether it's partnerships or agri-entrepreneur and so on. I think extremely valid. I think as I'm moving, I'm becoming more optimistic that we are all alchemists. We can turn silver into gold. But let me pick up another angle with Dr. Kalpana. All of this in some sense seem to be grounded in a pre-COVID era, while I think some of this is getting accelerated during COVID. So if we have to navigate through all of this, I think we'll have to probably live with COVID. As we know, the pandemic is becoming an endemic, and another couple of years, in some sense, we need to learn to live. And in this context, is there something specific that we need to do? Not only build all of this, and in turn also sail through the COVID period. What are your thoughts on that?
I think post-COVID, one realization, Mr. Shivkumar, is it has taught us that we are indeed in a very, very dynamic, environment. Things change overnight, and the center it's slowly becoming people-centric stage. If there is a people-centric stage and there is dynamism to be coming in, perhaps some of those, the universities and the R&D system, which has done a good job, and designed after the independence, perhaps time has come for us in this era, considering what all my other colleague panelists have raised, we realize that agriculture and food system is complex, but post-COVID it's much, much more complex. I mean, I don't know if there is any other word beyond complex, and that applies to us, because the number of, the challenges we continue to have on the production system and the productivity system, we continue to have. We also had a new element of nutrition systems coming in. And then when Dr. Chandrasekhar told, we are trying to develop an extension system which should be, again, forward-looking. If this has to come, where does it come from? It actually comes from the people engaged in the formal and informal sectors, directly and indirectly in agri-food systems. So I think time has now come for some of our, most of our universities to reshape their programs. How do we cope up? I think the first lesson was we have to teach agriculture during the pandemic time through remote uses, using technology. We will have problems because, after all, it's a hands-on approach in agriculture, and you cannot teach farming and all sitting on the computer and all. But then you have to be very, very innovative and imaginative to see that the next generation starts looking at things, to look at the challenges which were been already aired by my panelists, and how do we actually build them with an excitement in their brains to go into agri. There has been a phase in the national agriculture education, and I think Dr. Chandrasekhar will agree, there has been a phase where people were not very attracted to agriculture as a career. But I think the golden opportunity in post-COVID is you have a new generation of youngsters who are eager to come into agriculture and bring some new solutions. For that, we need to create a platform where perhaps some of our conventional thinking needs to be relooked, reshaped, and brought into some of the more forward-looking ideas so that what was raised by my co-panelists, the students and the next generation are capable of delivering. So it's not easy to just talk about it. There has to be a delivery system of those thoughts. To this end, in our own small way, I could just cite a small example. We do have a dynamic program in the undergraduates of all the colleges in agriculture, where they are for 6 months engaged with the farmer and also with the industry. It's a curriculum for it. So recently, after AgHub took shape here in PGTSU, and thanks to our Dean Agriculture, we tried to formalize a phase which is, we call it as design thinking course. And I think that spark, if we are looking in the youngsters to come bring innovations to answer our goals, I think that has to be seeded. And that was probably missing. In our small way, we have already started. And the response from those youngsters has been tremendous. And that's the indication and that's the positivity I have that we can cope up. Let's make, I personally think post-COVID has been, it's a golden chance. I would even go for a next level. It's a diamond chance and let's try to take it.
Wonderful. I think thanks for drawing out the importance of looking to future and then working from there, as also the criticality of next generation in taking all this. I mean, let me use that as an opportunity to run through a quick second round before we wind up and ask you to make all of this really happen around the country in a much more vibrant fashion than we are probably doing today, many of these cases. How should the whole ecosystem be made more innovative, more conducive for this kind of dynamism and innovation?
If you really look at these few decades, I would say there have been always things which have been driven in agriculture, education and all, you know, they've been driven, they've been driving forces. And today, I think it's important that policymakers and major policy interventions come through in terms of trying to recognize that there are several other systems which are interested. So you do have, you know, like you will now have a number of presentations. I don't know, it's a coincidence probably, but most of the startups who have ventured into agriculture have come from the non-agriculture phase. I mean, it's time to think why and re-look at it. So it's also time to think that we need to build those innovation platforms. And I think the answer is in innovation. When I mean, and somehow in this country, when I say innovation, everybody thinks innovation is centered only with startups. Please, that is just one player. Innovation is also trying to think of bringing university research programs along with industry in a more translational fashion. We have done that in pharma sector. We have done it in the health sector. We have done that even in IT sector. Can we not do that in agri sector? And this is the way. The translational research which goes to societal good is something which we have to take it as a focus and a target. Must also try to see that the several technologies lying on the, I mean, it's an often stated statement. They are there in the universities, but they need to be developed into market-ready products. Interestingly, in our innovation center, just 2 days back, we inked an MOU with a startup to join us in an R&D program. He comes into our program with a product which is already in the market, but perhaps it is at technology readiness at level 2, and there's a lot of element of research to be done along with the development also. So you can have collaborations where you can invite people beyond the agriculture and sector, include even grassroots level innovators who are silently contributing, and develop certain platforms of innovation and centers which are a little bit more flexible. The approach is flexible, so that that inhibition to come into these centers is not there. For that, I think intervention is a major factor.
Yeah, I think the angle of collaboration and policy that you brought out are absolutely key. And let me use that to turn to Mr. Kaundinya again, because he talked about technology and at the core of many things that we need to do and the shifts that we need to make. So if you have to really make both of these work, the collaboration and the policy, what do you see as the role of government and how it should change? What should be the role of industry and how it should change?
Yeah, so I think, on the policy front, a lot has to be done. Agriculture, as you know, is a state subject. This is actually one of the dichotomies we have, because we have so many states and each state has got its own agriculture policy. We don't still have a proper national agricultural policy, okay, which is agreed between all states and all political parties. That is a must. Without that, I think we will be taking a very fragmented approach towards agricultural development. So that would be my first recommendation, that there should be a national agricultural policy agreed by all states and all political parties. Second is that we need policy support for conservation of natural resources. Just talking about natural farming or talking about natural resource conservation doesn't help if some states give free water and free electricity to the farmers, right? So, and if states encourage, the moment a dam is constructed, the first thing they grow is rice or sugarcane, right? And you consume all the water for growing rice and sugarcane. So I think a policy has to take a systems approach. It has to be comprehensive, covering all loose ends and making it a model which can deliver final results on all fronts. So I think conservation of water and soil, farmers should be incentivized. Instead of doling out money to farmers, 10,000 rupees per acre or 20,000 rupees per acre, some of it should be linked to following of sustainable and conservation practices by the farmers. The second thing is that encouragement for smart crops, what Johan's favorite subject. So encouragement for smart crops through policy support, whether it could be MSP. I think MSP should be so attractive that it will make farmers grow those crops. Secondly, they will also be climate resilient, and they can save water and natural resources. And they must use the smart grains in PDS, and like Dr. Chandrasekhara mentioned, maybe in many of the other meals that are being served around the country. And we have 1.5 lakh crores of food subsidy budget. So they should get into the food subsidy programs and things like that. I think that is another area where actually government has to also look at what is the farmer getting out of consumer price. Currently, farmer is getting less than 30% of consumer price. So I think using, modifying supply chains and transforming supply chains to make farmer get at least 50-60% of consumer price is also something which is highly dependent on the policy of the government. I think that is also something we should do. The third point is that there must be a clear support for companies who invest in research. That is not there today. There is no recognition for research-based companies, whether it is a research in breeding, research in biotechnology, research in modern crop protection products, research into modern crop nutrition products, whatever it is you take, all of them need support, recognition by the government, and positive support for such companies. So on the policy front, although I can list 2025, but I think these three I would list as the top three. What should the private sector's agenda should be? I think the number one agenda should be we should invest more in research and technology transfer. As a country, we invest very little in research or in you know that on the global rankings, our research investments are very poor, very low. I think we have to improve research investments. If you take just seed sector, we invest less than 3% of our revenues in research, in seeds, while global averages are 10 to 12%. I think we have to step up research investments. That is one thing that must be on the, and also technology transfer. A lot of technologies are available in the country, outside the country. We must transfer those technologies and spend enough time and effort on transferring those technologies. I think both agenda of number one for private sector. Second, I would say is that private sector should also look at providing complete solutions to the farmers, not just selling a product and running away from there. You know, that has been the approach of many private companies for many years. I think time has come that they must look at providing complete solutions to the farmers. Farmers' development, farmers' profitability should be under, that must be ingrained into the minds of the frontline salesmen and the frontline technical people who actually are in touch with the farmers. So that farmer education, farmer profitability focus, all that should come under as the second area of agenda for the private sector. Third is that private sector should bring environmentally friendlier technologies, whether it is in seeds or in fertilizers, crop nutrition, or in biotechnology or in crop protection products. How can we bring such products to the markets and make extra efforts towards that? Because we have to also know, and we have to be also responsible that we have to reduce chemical load in the environment. And how do we do that if we don't bring modern technologies which can actually reduce? Some of the modern technologies could be very traditional. When I say modern, I don't mean exactly very modern in that sense, like Dr. Kalpana said, that they could lie in the traditional things also. And finally, I would say that we must use modern digital technology. The private industry, whatever you are doing, whether you are in whichever input you are doing or whichever output you are doing, I think digital technology will help us to bridge a lot of gaps which have existed because we could not physically build some of the systems, and some of them can be built using digital technologies today. I think if we can connect farmers to the markets, both on the input side and output side, we can deliver messages and education to him. We can provide on-farm services to him, you know, all that. So we can help him to actually add value at the village level and transfer and get him connected into the international markets. I think a lot can be done with the digital technology. That should be also on the agenda of all private companies, whichever input you are using or whichever output you are selling or whatever business you are in related to agriculture. So those are my few points on that front.
Thank you. I think the importance of systems approach, once again, reinforcing what Joanna said earlier as an integrated thinking from a policy perspective is rather key. And also bringing out the role of research in bringing the right technologies. The last point that you're making on digital technologies, let me make use of that and turn to Dr. Chandrasekhara. And he talked about various models of extension. And now if you were to integrate these two, digital technologies and your thoughts on extension, what do we make of it? How do we make use of digital technologies?
Yeah, it is very important observation, I appreciate. But I am not seeing ICT-led extension in isolation. They are part and parcel of group-led extension, market-led, agripreneurship-led, and PPP-led extension. Natural ecosystem is set now. There is mobile in the hands of every farmers in this country. I think we have to make use of this great opportunity. From public as well as private side, we need to work out a national digital literacy campaign among the farmers so that they can use the same mobile for even agricultural development purpose also. We have to appreciate some of the public initiatives. For example, number of ENAMs now increased to 1,000 from 500. Electronic National Agriculture Markets. So the number is going to increase in the future. So we need to mobilize more farmers to make use of this kind of opportunities. Uberization is taking place. I don't know how many of you are aware. From Government of India side, we have a mobile-based app called Kisan Rath. So using the mobile, farmers can have access to local transport, logistics support services. We have a Kisan Call Center. It's a helpline. At present, of course, it is drawing the attention of around 5 to 6 million farmers. But there is scope to increase at least 4 times more, because only thing we need to popularize this program. Similarly, we have AgMarkNet, which provides restructuring is going on. It can reach more number of people by providing market-led solutions. Apart from that, of course, Kalpana Shastri highlighted on agri startups. We need to support more and more agri startups who blend technology with agriculture, and they are the ambassadors of change. I think integrating them with our day-to-day activities, whether it is public or private institution, is very, very important. If they are successful, probably our ICT initiatives will be successful in the days to come. Thank you.
Wonderful, I think so. Like we all come to live during the COVID times with, you can't think digitally something else. I think that's what you are really saying, that digital is integral in everything that we are doing, in extension or otherwise. Let me lastly turn to Joanna once more. While in his welcome remarks, Raj talked about very soon they were going to do a program on women making impact in agriculture. But in the panel, we haven't really explicitly covered that subject. I think everything that we are talking about, certainly women are involved, and probably more than men in many activities, starting right from the on-field activities. But if you have to talk about women in agriculture and impact, and how do we raise the salience of women that doing work probably are not getting enough kind of visibility and salience, and it can do a lot of good to agriculture in moving us towards that golden future. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, thanks, Shiv. What I've found, I have identified, in my experience, what I found the biggest barrier for women. But what I do find, and I would assume every person in this room truly believes women should have the same opportunities and get equal recognition. Would you agree? Everybody would feel that way? Yeah, I see heads nodding. Good. So what I've found to be the biggest barrier is the unconscious barrier. People do believe, most people do believe, women are there, equally there, and should be contributing and given the same opportunities. It's the unconscious barrier. And I'll give a few examples. I was up a few years ago up in Gujarat with a very, very large agriculture company, and they were very proud showing us their work with the farmers, very successful work. And they do a lot of training with farmers as well. So I said to the farmers who were all with us, I said, who has had training recently from the company? And lots of hands went up. And then I looked around, and every male farmer had their hand up, and not one woman had their hand up. And I said, why haven't the women had any training? And the men said, it's okay because we can tell them what to do. We've had the training. Now, that very, very good agricultural company was giving the training. They had not done the training saying, we only want men and we're not going to allow women. Of course they didn't do that. They provided fantastic training and the men attended the training. But the company just hadn't consciously said, now let's make sure we engage everybody in the community equally. So it was just a consciousness of thinking through it. Another example, I was inaugurating a very big training program, an agriculture training program. And I walked into the room. It was a 3-day live-in program. Everyone was very excited. They were just about to start this 3-day training, and there were farmers from many different areas come together. And I walked in, I stood at the podium, I looked around, and I was the only woman in the room. So I quickly whispered to somebody, and I said, why are there no women here? And they said, because it's a 3-day live-in course and it's very difficult for the women to leave the family and also have 3 days here. Now, the big organisation that had organised this training, they also had not consciously said, let's design this as a 3-day live-in course so the women can't attend. Of course they didn't do that. They just hadn't consciously thought through, how do we design in a way that then equally allows different people to participate? And I'll give one last example. Sorry, on the radical side. I visited a very prestigious organisation in Hyderabad. I walked in, it's a very beautiful building, and in the foyer, it's like walking into an art gallery. They have 20 absolutely huge big posters around, surrounding you, with very famous people, with very inspirational quotes. And you walk around the room and read it, and you really feel inspired. But then I counted, and there were 18 male famous people with inspirational quotes and 2 women. Now, I'm sure that very prestigious organisation had not said, oh, let's only put 2 women in here so we don't motivate or inspire the women and we don't show what's there in the world. Of course, they didn't think that. But it was just that unconsciousness of not thinking, how do we ensure everybody's included? How do we ensure the women feel motivated when they walk in here? How do we ensure even the men see that there is this equality out there? There's a lot of women who have achieved a lot as well. So what I've found in the world is people actually are very genuine and really want to be inclusive, but it's that unconsciousness, and all of us, I have it too. You often sometimes have to sit back and think, are we being inclusive? And so that's what I've found. And of course, I've been a difficult person on this jury, always saying, how are we looking at the women?
No, thank you. I think it is a brilliant insight from different examples, which just shows us in terms of what we are conscious and how unconsciously we do things. So with that last word, let me just wrap up with 1 more minute of synthesizing what we just heard. I think one thing certainly I'm taking away is that there is a lot of optimism and hope to move and be the alchemists that we can be, to convert all the silver we have seen in COVID times into gold as the future of the agriculture. So I think that optimism is something that I would like to close with. But I think what brought us here, and that silver, is not going to take us there in terms of making it gold. We heard some very important shifts being talked about. First, we opened with that we've been a production-driven system, and how do we make that into more demand-responsive production system? I think that is a very, very important shift that is necessary, as we heard. The second, that we have done many things in isolation, but it's time to look at this in a more holistic and systems fashion. We can't, in isolation, look at farmer poverty and addressing and natural resource water and in isolation and address. I think there are many things that we need to look at as a whole systems and look at that. The third shift we said is that while we look at holistically, we need to be extremely context-specific in the way we apply things. Extension did bring out that very clearly, and how do we deal with innovation and all of that in terms of the context-specific application while we are holistic in terms of our thinking. Another important shift, while we have culture as integral part of agri, in addition to culture, the role of technology was brought out, and the importance of research underlying that technology, that adoption and fusing that with the culture that is part of agriculture, that forward was another important angle. Digital technologies, it is integral part of everything that we do, is one more shift. I think we have learned a lot more of that in the last 18 months, and that's something that is necessary in taking us forward. I think what also gets underscored in a platform like this, and that came through in the panel, is really the importance of collaboration. A lot of work is done in individual enterprises and government departments and whichever part of the society we belong to. But I think the role of collaboration in really making all of this as end-to-end did come through very clearly. And we also dealt with a very important shift at the end in terms of women are integral part of this whole chain all through, but unconsciously a lot of bias crept in, and probably that is also holding us back. And therefore, how do we become more conscious on that front and mainstream in our thinking and be more conscious about the salience that we give to women in agriculture. I think very important points, very important shifts for us to move towards that golden future. Let me thank Raj and Anita for giving us this opportunity to talk about this subject and engage in a conversation. And I hope you all have some takeaways from this discussion. I wish you all the very best, and on behalf of the jury that's here, congratulate and compliment all the winners. And it really was quite tough for us in doing that job. And you would see that in some other categories, the choice was so difficult that we had to give multiple winners. All the very best to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.